So here is the eureka moment for XRIFFz. So I thought of an idea of utilizing a tool, something like spectral layers, or a tool that may exist in the future, to create the spectral-based riffs. So if you think about Polyphia, they're doing really incredible things, and there's a lot of bands out there doing really incredible things, and there's a lot of musicians out there doing really incredible things with things like tap and found sounds in their instruments. So the next incarnation of that is the spectralized riffing. So you won't just hear an ordinary instrument or blends of arrangements performing riffs. So instead, you're going to hear a wall of sound that is performing riffs. So what this means is you'll have gigantic pools of sound kind of fading in and out, but in a very precise, edgy, cool way, hopefully. So here it is, the Spectral Riffs articulator concept. The Spectral Riffs articulator, also the Spectral Riffs step sequencer, which you could think of it like that, or the Spectral DAW, or the spectralized version of wave sequencing. Now, if you know how cool wave sequencing is, then you can think of it as the even cooler version, because you're going to select parts of the selections of waves to do the sequencing. So anyways, so what it is the first thing is it has to grab parts selectable on a grid. So if we're thinking about something like a DAW, like spectral layers, you would see like a pattern-based grid of maybe 16 beats, etc., where you would be able to select within those 16 beats the part that you want to either utilize, repeat, or adjust accordingly, or have not play at all. So the part it grabs will have various widths or be made to be an empty space, and it's functioning something like a step sequencer, except through an entire mixture of sounds. The part it grabs can be further tweaked, of course, with pitch, effects, and length. And the reason to make it a grid is basically you're auto-generating a musicality. Now there can be a quantization factor as well. And so, of course, that can also be adjusted. So we're talking about a really cool concept here to kind of populate the XRIFFz formula with very little effort needed. And that's kind of the point. As we get smarter about developing very cool sounds, the tools are helping facilitate much more incredible, detailed ways of doing this. So anyways, the next component is the parts the Spectral Riff Maker grabs are not selections of a track, but they are fragments of selections. There is a special bleed that creates a new instrument. So when you're grabbing a riff that's like a guitar and a piano, and you want to just get the guitar and the piano, and there's probably a bass and a drum playing underneath it, but you don't want the bass and the drum, and you only want a certain ratio between the guitar and the piano. So in this way, you would dial in the amount of spectral bleed that you wanted, so that the sound over time would be adjustable, so that it would create an even cooler and a more original sound. So now I kind of go into that. In this way, the sound morphs the layers of the selection. So if you have the guitar and the piano playing simultaneously in your entire sequence, then you would be able to bleed spectrally, not through volume. And so when you adjust things with spectrum, that's whole nother ball game, because we're dealing with like a morphing factor that changes a lot of components besides just the level of the track. So that's what makes it cool. But anyways, in this way, the sound morphs. The layers comprise of the instruments, the frequency, the amplitude, the shape, and as I mentioned, the quantization. So the layer is going to be like the main beat, and it's going to be the string of the main beats that comprise the actual XRIFF. And the XRIFF is going to go either on top of a drum and a bass, or it's going to be a standalone thing that's going to have a unique world, or it's going to be used behind an atmospheric bed, like like an underscore. So these parameters of shaping the selection can be modified for each beat. So in that way, it further creates more of an organic quality to the spectral riff. So what we're looking at is, let's say there's a wave file right here, and you're going to go through this BPM grid and select this piece over here, this piece over here, this piece over here, this piece over here, this, except this one's going to be a circle. This one's going to be shaped a certain way like this. This one can be a square. So what happens there is it's subtly adjusting or dramatically adjusting the intonation, the articulation, all these things, the bleed, all these things are happening very quickly. And so, you're creating a very cool experience with a randomness component, which is kind of a key. You're doing this subtle modulation into randomness. But it can be either drastic or it can be very subtle. The final thing is, it's kind of like we're stocking, or it's kind of like when you see a newspaper clip out where a stalker wrote a note, and it's all these weird shapes, and yet it makes this sentence together. Except in this case, we're stocking music creation. But that's kind of what we're doing here, is we're taking these abstractions based on a 16-part, let's say, grid. And the abstractions, which are the selections and the fragments of selections of the sounds, the main sounds you're drawing from, these are comprising the actual riff. Because the key component with XRIFFz is to get to this cool riff. It's not just to make random noise. Because if you wanted to just do 16 pieces of random noise, that's very doable very quickly. But what you want is something that has a unified quality and especially a lead quality. So these riffs are something you're going to pull from like main lead concepts, and to further make them more interesting, you're drawing out the spectral components and then perhaps dubbing in the actual layers of the lead later on. So thinking about things that are complex that are happening these days, a lot of it involves the gating, the envelope following, subtle ways of attack with limiters and release, etc., etc. So we're adding just that higher bit of sophistication to this and making the XRIFF. So all you're thinking about now is, instead of a guitar riff, you have something that's moving along the main layer of a production that's comprised of an entire range of instruments that are bleeding in and out of one another, including sound design, including synthesizers, voices, whatever you want, basically. And that is the riff itself. That's the focal point. So the riff can also be just a backing supportive material under the main mix to support an actual like song construction. But that's what's going to really open the Pandora's box of XRIFFz, because what happens if you take, like let's say such components from a Michael Jackson song, you should never do this, but let's say you did, and then you would take those components and paste them into another track that's completely unrelated, maybe something urban or something romantic or whatever, and so you're taking these elements that don't necessarily go together, and perhaps you would adjust the tempo and adjust the key and mesh them or fuse them together. So we're really opening up a new way, and that's why XRIFFz isn't just a cool way to make riffs on productions, but it's another way to actually remix and reinterpret what could be done in a production. So it really does open up a giant what the heck, with what could be done with remixing. So anyways, that's the concept. I'm putting this up first because I'm actually going to try some of these things and see how it goes before, proceeding in further with this. But the basic idea is really solid, that this would produce an interesting sound riff, but I want to get it out to YouTube first, because I'm sure there are creative minds out there, especially at like places like Melda Production, who could actually build this system. And people like Steinberg, who are developing spectral layers, this is kind of something that they could think about. although they already have a lot on their plate and they've done an incredible job. But the ability to make these kind of foolproof riffs. And so just imagine you're learning music and you want to just be able to pull out all these riffs really quickly and make a instant gratification of a song. So you would say, hey, let's pull out the spectral lifts, starting with the guitar layer, and let's pull out some of the bleed from this instrument, some of the bleed from that instrument, make this pattern here. I mean, in the music, it's writing itself. So it's incredible. And so that's the XRIFFz Spectral Riffs concept in a nutshell. A long 10-minute nutshell.